B.
Thank you, Kendra. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the May Child Passenger Safety Educators Forum. I am Tammy Franks, the curriculum representative on the National Child Passenger Safety Board, and it is my honor today to serve you as moderator for the Educators Forum. So just a couple reminders as we get started. Attendees are requested to not participate in this webinar if you're operating a motor vehicle. The webinar will be recorded and you can listen to the recording when you safely arrive at your destination. We'll get this recording posted to the Child Passenger Safety Learning Portal at carseateducation.org within about 1 to 2 business days. And for child passenger safety technicians in attendance, that would be the U.S. Certified Child Passenger Safety Technicians, this presentation qualifies for 1 continuing education unit. Attendance on this webinar is required for at least 45 minutes in order to earn the CEU credit. And proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. When entering the CEU into your Safe Kids profile, this is a webinar teleconference, and all required information will be found on that proof of attendance. So please join me in welcoming our speaker. Our speaker today is James Fitzpatrick. As you can see, he has his camera on and has joined us already. He is the Community Engagement Representative on the National Child Passenger Safety Board. In addition, he serves as the Regulatory Compliance Manager at Newell Brands, so you may recognize him from many of his conference presentations. And in his spare time, he also is chair of the Manufacturers Alliance for Child Passenger Safety. So again, please join me in welcoming James. And as I said earlier, if you have questions throughout, please enter them in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that. And he has built-in time at the end to answer the questions. Okay, James, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, MACPS and all my adequate free time that I have lots of these days. So thank you so much for that, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Very happy to be here with you guys and walk you through some of these fairly commonly asked questions we've been getting. So hopefully we'll be able to cover a lot of the information that we're getting these questions on, and then help you guys answer any specific questions that you have. Can we go forward a slide? Thanks, Tammy. So what we are referencing, of course, is Canadian information that you will find in the new 2024 CPST Certification Training. So this certification training was a collaboration with NHTSA and Transport Canada, and we're very excited about this fact. As you go through the new technician guide, you will notice that there are specific Canadian callouts and they are optional to teach. So it is not required if you're teaching a course in the US. You do not have to use this information, but we've had a lot of feedback from people who want to use it and want to understand it a little bit better. So that's why we're here today, to hopefully get you guys on track. As we go today, as we said, feel free to throw things in the Q&A. If for some reason we don't answer your questions today, feel free to reach out to me as well. Happy to help any way we can. I wanted to start by touching on the regulation update for Canada. So we know that the new regulation update in the US, which has been full steam ahead, is coming very quickly. It is not coming so quickly for Canada. So as we stand today, which is end of May 2025, there does not, at this time, there is no proposal, there is no update to the Canadian regulations for car seats. Excuse me. Now, that doesn't mean it's not being worked on. We had a meeting with Transport Canada just a couple of weeks ago, and they are getting closer to kind of revealing what they want to do. Their intention very much is to align as closely as possible with the US, which is fairly common across regulations when it comes to children's products. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfectly matched, however. There tend to be some discrepancies or differences between. The way the regulation process in Canada works, and this is very much a nice to know, not a have to know, what we will see at some point this summer is a consultation. So that consultation will be posted by Transport Canada, and stakeholders would be able to provide feedback to them based on what they're thinking about doing as far as a regulation goes. From there, they'll take that consultation feedback, put it into an official form, and then they will post what's called Canada Gazette Part 1. Now, for those of you who've never heard of the Canada Gazette, you can go online and search it, and it is the regulation proposal and final regulation posting place for everything in Canada. So you would have to fish through a lot of different regulations because if it's anything that's a regulation, you're going to find it there. Um, Canada Gazette Part 1, you'll also be able to provide comments on. So what I would caution people is that once the consultation is open, if you're a stakeholder and interested in providing information, that's a great time to do it. Because typically, once we get to Canada Gazette Part 1, other than glaring omissions or things that were clearly left out by mistake, it's pretty much what it's going to be at that point. Not that we wouldn't provide feedback, trying to get changes if we can, but we're pretty much where we're at. From there, once we have the final regulation and it's going to be posted in Canada Gazette Part 2. So Part 1 is the proposed regulation, Part 2 is here's the final regulation. That would contain the enforce date and all those wonderful pieces that we need to know to ensure that we're meeting the regulation on time. So as we sit today, we fully expect to see an update that would include new frontal regulations, side impact, things very similar to the US, but we don't have anything official as of yet. So stay tuned, probably sometime this summer. We can skip ahead, Tammy. Thank you. So Tammy has done a fantastic job of helping with this because of all the spare time I have. And what we have done is basically laid out module by module the Canadian callouts that you're going to find. So in each of the modules of the technician guide, there are some specific callouts. You'll find these as we go through today. So if you had your technician guide and wanted to make notes, you certainly can, or all of this will match up kind of in the order you'll find them in the technician guide. Thank you very much. So key statistics. I'm going to just read through this one a little bit and then try to explain it as much as we can. So in Canada, on average, one child 14 years and younger is killed every 8 days, and an estimated 14 are injured every day in motor vehicle crashes. That is significantly lower than the numbers we see in the US, and that is by no means a commentary on the quality of drivers in Canada. I've driven here for 50 years, it's not even close to that. It is a reality that we have a lot less people in Canada. So we have a very large landmass in Canada, but we have probably 300 million fewer people than the US at this point. So just because of that alone, these statistics are going to be quite different than what we see in the US. So these are compiled by Transport Canada and they are put together in that manner. When the driver is buckled, children are restrained about 98% of the time. We'd love to see that. And when the driver is unbuckled, children are restrained only about 68% of the time. So we do understand that, kind of that monkey see, monkey do we've talked about in the past, that being a good example for other passengers in the vehicle is very key, especially for the younger ones. We can jump ahead, Tim. Thank you so much. So we jump all the way up to Module 4, and we're going to start talking a little bit about CMVSS. So in Canada, Transport Canada sets the Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. So if the MVSS there sounds familiar, if you replace the C with an F, you've got the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards in the US. Currently, the Canadian regulations can be found in the Motor Vehicle Restraint System and Booster Seat Safety Regulations. Now that's a mouthful and a half, and we will trim that down to the RSSR when you find different references throughout the manual, and that is done by Transport Canada and how they reference this specific regulation. If you want to get really specific, SOR 2010-90, that means that's when the regulation was actually published initially. There was some time before it actually came into force, so there was a little bit there. All of the CMVSS regulations are located within the motor vehicle restraint system regulation. So each of the different chapters through there will tell you forward-facing restraints, rear-facing restraints, booster seats, etc., and will provide the specifics on labeling requirements and all of those different factors that manufacturers have to meet. We can skip ahead again, Tammy. Thank you very much. Lockability requirement. So Canada actually introduced this lockability requirement quite a bit after the US did. In 2015, it became law. Now, again, this is not unusual for what we see in Canadian regulations. We tend to follow the US, and it takes a little bit of time. Our process is longer in a lot of cases, and it takes some time to find out. We want to align as closely as possible. So what we found here is that a lot of manufacturers had met this requirement long before, but this is when the requirement actually came into force. So it's not uncommon if you had a vehicle manufactured in 2010, as an example, that it may very well have had locking retractors at that point. It just wasn't a requirement for Canadian specific vehicles. We tend to see kind of a mismatch of things appear in Canada. So you may see lower anchors, for example, that say ISOFIX, and that happens from time to time. We may see some of these retractors that met the requirement long before they had to because a very similar vehicle was sold in both countries. So that's the kind of things that we look at sometimes with this. We can skip ahead again. Thank you so much. So module 5, talking a little bit about airbags and manual airbag switches. So currently in Canada, manufacturers are allowed to install a manual passenger airbag switch in new vehicles. In addition, for a vehicle without a manual switch, caregivers may request to have a manual switch installed. And there is a link there that you can follow to learn more about the deactivation program for airbags in Canada. I will caution you, it is a bit of a long process. You are going to have to provide a lot of information as to why you would want to deactivate an airbag, and they're not overly willing to be cooperative, as you can imagine, with deactivating safety equipment. But there are, of course, unique circumstances that we run into from time to time. So if a parent or caregiver has found themselves in a situation where they need to have this done, you can get that kind of a exception made by Transport Canada by following this particular link. So that is found also in the technician guide, as we mentioned. So if you're looking for that, easy enough to find. Jump ahead. Now, the most callouts by far are in this section, which is section 6, which deals with lower anchors and tethers. So number one we'll get to right away is that in Canada, the Universal Anchorage System, or UAS, consists only of the lower anchors. The tether anchor is referenced separately. It is a bit of a unique requirement, so we're going to chat a little bit through that, in that the tether is required and mandatory for all forward-facing harnessed car seats in Canada. And that is obviously a difference where the US it's optional and we test with and without tether. In Canada, you must use the tether whether you're using lower anchors or a seat belt for a forward-facing harnessed car seat. Excuse me, we notice the different name change as well here, so we don't use latch because both are referenced separately. So the universal anchorage system refers only to the lower anchors. So if we're talking about whether it's the anchors in the vehicle or the lower anchor attachments themselves, we're going to reference separately from the tether. Okay, jump ahead. In Canada, again, kind of a unique requirement, the markings for the lower anchors are required to be visible even if the lower anchors themselves are visible. So you would still have to have those little UAS or latch indicators on the back vehicle seat to indicate where you could find the lower anchors, even if you can see them. Okay. And also in Canada, if a tether anchor is hidden under a cover or in a location not immediately visible, there must be a marking or label indicating the presence of the anchor. The marking or label should be located in a visible position near the cover or on the cover itself. So if you have a vehicle where there is something covered up or there's things over top of the tether anchor, it must be marked clearly, and these are typically required to be color contrasting. I'm going to try to speak English today. Icons, just so that they are more visible as well. So Canadian regulation require a car seat's lower anchor connector locations to be marked with the same logo as used in the vehicles. This is also a bit of a unique requirement, and that is somewhere on or near the lower anchor connector of the car seat itself, there has to be a color contrasting logo for the lower anchor symbol. So that UAS symbol, the same one you'll see, that little button on the back vehicle seats, has to actually be on the lower anchor somewhere. So depending on the manufacturer that we get our parts from. A lot of them we use a little flag label, for example. You'll see that on some of them. They may actually have different colors on the icon itself on the lower anchor connector if you use the premium anchors, or on the hook anchors, for example. A lot of times you'll see that black anchor with the white indicator, and that is actually a regulated requirement in CMVSS for Canada that you must have that indicator. The thought process behind that, of course, is that it's going to make it easier for parents or caregivers to try to find that connector and where to find it on the child car seat. Jump ahead, Tammy. So in the past, some car seat and vehicle manufacturers did not provide guidance on how to install the car seat in the vehicle once the child exceeded the weight limit of the lower anchors. For this reason, if no information is given in both the car seat and vehicle owner's manuals and the child's weight more than 40 pounds or 18 kilograms, here for my Canadian friends, Transport Canada recommends that a forward-facing car seat be installed using both the UAS and vehicle seat belt together with the tether. We're going to take a minute on this one. So this is obviously a little bit of a different recommendation than we see from, number one, the majority of car seat manufacturers. Where did this come from? This is driven by Transport Canada's research department. So Transport Canada does a great deal of testing in vehicles, which is kind of a cool thing. And part of that in vehicle testing is that they'll try to use up as much of the space as possible so they're not just wrecking a car and not getting as much information as possible. So there's been a lot of research done in vehicle crashes using car seats as well, which is fantastic because it's information we wouldn't see typically. Most of us can't afford to crash cars. Apparently, Transport Canada can. Transport Canada came to the conclusion that using both in a vehicle is fine. Now, the problem for us as manufacturers, as far as that recommendation goes, is that the regulation doesn't allow us to test that way. So, by regulation, we can only test with one belt system at a time, whether it's a lap belt, a lap shoulder belt, or the lower anchors. So, we are not allowed to, in regulated testing, mix and match or use both. So, this is where this has definitely become a bit of a contentious point over the years in transport's recommendation. We understand kind of where it's coming from. It's coming from a good place of something's better than nothing. So if the parent or caregiver isn't sure, they're going to recommend that they use both. However, it kind of puts us manufacturers in a bit of a tedious spot because it's not something we can recommend because we don't do that testing in most cases. Not all manufacturers do. So I hope that kind of clarifies where this comes from. As I said, this is very much driven from the research and development side of Transport Canada. Um, I think that's the cleanest answer I can give to that one without getting myself in any more trouble here today. So let's skip ahead, Tammy, shall we? Okay, so car seats. In Canada, rear facing car seats are not required to be designed with a tether. Some manufacturers have them on their car seats that can be installed rear facing and require their use. So if you design a car seat with a rear facing tether and you require the use of it, then Transport Canada would be required to test with it as well. So you are allowed to test with it if you choose to do so. In Canada, by federal requirement, as we touched on a little bit earlier, a tether is always required for the installation of forward facing car seats. And that's been around for a number of years at this point. We don't expect that that is going to change, which is why we say they try to align as closely as possible. But we don't fully expect a total alignment of regulations because they are very much believing that the tether is required, that it certainly has benefits, which we are all aware of as technicians and instructors. So Canada is requiring that way. But the difference here is that you must use it forward facing. If the if the car seat manufacturer recommends using it rear facing, then you can state that it is required to be used as long as you've done testing with it as well. So now we'll jump ahead slightly to Module 7. We talk a little bit about Canada's RSSR, which we went over the short abbreviation earlier. So wow, English is not my first language today. I'd try French, but that would be far worse for everybody. So we'll continue in English. All car seats and booster seats manufactured for use in Canada must meet the performance and labeling requirements of Transport Canada's Motor Vehicle Restraint System and Booster Seat Safety Regulation, or that RSSR. There's the link there if you want to look this up. It's a great read. It'll put you to sleep pretty quickly if you want to go through it one night. But it's certainly available for download if anybody wants to pull up the regulation and have a look through and look at some of the nuances between the regulations between countries. Jump ahead again, Tammy. This is where, again, we kind of separate and get into a little bit of some different information. I think a little bit of a misunderstanding as well. So I want to try to explain this one as best we can. So in Canada, all manufacturers who import seats to Canada are required to apply what's called a National Safety Mark, or NSM, to their seats so they can be legally sold. The National Safety Mark is what you see there. It's this little round emblem with a maple leaf in the middle. And then the applicable CMVSS regulations will be kind of along the outside of it. So as an example, if it was just a booster seat, it would meet 213.2. So that's all you would find on this. And if there were more stages for that particular seat, then they would be listed on the NSM. Where the three Ys are in the middle would be the manufacturer's code. So each manufacturer has their own specific code to understand that that's who's registered for that NSM. There is a database. You can go online and look up NSM numbers and find out which one belongs to who. In Canada, car seats and booster seat manufacturers must apply the national safety mark indicating the car seat and booster seats meet Canadian safety standards for the seats to be imported and sold legally. Couple of things to this. So this is for a manufacturer, a one-time application to Transport Canada per mode of use. So if I was bringing a booster seat to Canada for the first time, I would have to apply for a national safety mark to be able to legally import them. Now, Transport Canada reviewing that information and granting the national safety mark is not saying that it's not a official reference to it. They're not approving any products. They're simply saying that we have met the minimum regulatory requirement. Now, if my same company wanted to design and import a second booster seat, I do not have to supply that information to Transport Canada again, unless at some point in time they ask me for it for review for whatever reason. They may be doing a survey, they may be looking at it, or they may have questions about it. So initially, when I'm applying for the NSM, I have to supply all the paperwork, all the test reports, um, everything down the road. They're going to want copies of labelings, manuals. They're going to look at all the different webbing tests, all the chemical tests, everything that is required within the CMVSS regulations. And all they are really doing is checking those boxes saying, yes, you've done it. Okay. So they're not saying, great, this is an approved seat. They're saying you can affix this because you have met the minimum regulatory requirements. So I think that's a very important thing that has been misunderstood over the years. I get a number of people saying, well, every single time you bring a seat to Canada, you have to apply for an NSM, and that's not correct. It's a one-time application. We can, as a manufacturer, continue as a self-certification process after that initial NSM has been granted. So I hope that helps clear that one up a little bit. We can jump ahead again, Tammy. So in Canada, labels are required to be in English and French. So we threw some poutine in here for my French friends. If you haven't tried it, it's fantastic. It's anything but healthy for you, but it's good stuff. So in Canada, there are two official languages, both English and French, and both are required to be on car seats. This again is a fairly significant difference from the US. In the US, I have to have English on the seat, but I don't have to put Spanish on the seat. So that frees up a lot more space. French also tends to be a lot wordier than English. Sorry, French friends, but it's true and you know it. So as we're trying to squeeze all these labels in to make sure everything's the correct size and comparable to the English and we have the same kind of space, we end up taking up both sides of the car seat because we need that much space to ensure that all the applicable warnings and labels have been applied to the seat. Um, Not only labels, we're talking about manuals, we're talking about cartons, all the different artworks, anything with wording to it has to be in both official languages. So we can't get away with just English. We have to make sure that we're putting English and French. That's why it makes it a lot more difficult to have seats that are sold in both countries because all that space has now been taken up by our English and French labels. Make sense? I hope. Next up. Thank you very much. So Transport Canada also has best practice recommendations, and you can find these on the Transport Canada website. So these are available at the link that you'll see there. As these are Transport Canada recommendations, it's important to check the age, weight, or height requirements set out in provincial and territorial regulations. So this is where we want to confuse you just slightly more because why not? So Transport Canada will federally set the regulations for car seats. So Transport Canada says, here are the regulations that manufacturers have to meet. Here's the minimum test requirements. Here's all your labeling requirements. And here's the minimum heights, weights, etc. for car seats. Problem is, not every province or territory has aligned to that. So just as an example that we like to give, Canada's regulations state that you cannot forward face a child before a minimum of 22 pounds. In Ontario, which is where I'm sitting currently, the Highway Traffic Act still says that you can do so at 20 pounds. So there's a major discrepancy there. The key to this is that you want to follow what the car seat manufacturer says because you have to use the seat correctly. And that's very important to ensure that if we're using the seat correctly, we're using it how the manufacturer has tested and certified that seat to go. Just because some of the provincial or territorial laws haven't quite caught up to where the federal laws are doesn't mean that we can undercut and kind of go with that lower weight. It means we still have to follow what's on the seat. So if the child is under 22 pounds, just because the laws in the province state that they could go forward facing, well, they don't meet the minimum requirement to use that seat forward facing, so they should not be put in that position. You can go online, you can look at Transport Canada's recommendations here. If you wanted to search each of the different provincial, territorial highway traffic acts, you can certainly do that and find all the different age and weight requirements there as well. And a lot of them will vary from what you see federally. You can skip ahead, Tammy. We'll talk again a little bit about the national safety mark. So Transport Canada regulates the manufacturer and importers of car seats and booster seats and does not rate, rank, or endorse specific car seats or booster seats. Now, we've talked a lot about Transport Canada, but Health Canada also plays a big role in this. So Health Canada and Transport Canada both have the ability to issue recalls for products in Canada. And this falls under the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act. So that would relate to any consumer products, and child car seats fall within that spectrum as well. What we tend to see for most ways, and to kind of keep everybody in a lane, so to speak, is that Transport Canada very much deals with the performance requirements of the seat. They will deal with the manufacturers. They'll talk to us if they found specific labeling issues or things like that. What we see with Health Canada is more of the import concerns. So if they're finding some third-party websites that maybe shouldn't be importing car seats, or there's some things that are concerned that they may be unsafe because they haven't been approved for use in Canada with the National Safety Mark application, then that's where you tend to see Health Canada jump in and say, hey, this is something that we're going to recall because it hasn't met the minimum safety requirements set out to have a national safety mark applied. So this particular mark that you see on the screen here kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at. So any of the specific car seats will have that CMVSS as we mentioned earlier. So this particular one is off of a convertible car seat. So it's certified to both 213 and 213.1, which are continued to be weight-based regulations. So they are strictly about the weights, not necessarily about anything else. Okay. And as we said earlier, with the Maple Leaf, you see the 3-digit code in the middle, and that would be the code for that particular manufacturer. All right. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit, but recalls, as you can see here, Transport Canada maintains safety alerts and notices at the link there. You can get information and get alerts, emails, etc. if you wanted to sign up as well. There are also places to look at active and closed investigations. So if you wanted to see if Transport Canada is investigating a particular product, a vehicle, for example, or a car seat, you can look up these particular defect investigations and they keep them reasonably up to date. I'm not going to say perfectly, but reasonably at least. And then to report a potential safety defect of a car seat or booster seat, fill Transport Canada's online defect complaint, and there's a very long link there as well. Or you can call the 1-800 number and speak directly with a defect investigator. This is where I always like to remind technicians and instructors, if you are submitting a defect investigation or defect concern, whether it's to Transport Canada, to NHTSA, please make sure you're contacting your manufacturer as well. Okay. I know that we've done some presentations in the past talking about recalls, reporting requirements, etc. There's nothing that we hide from each other, essentially. So we have a very open and honest dialogue with Transport Canada, with NHTSA as a manufacturer. So if there's an issue that's come up, we let them know about it. And we'll talk to them early on and say, look, we've had this report. We're looking into it. We're not sure what's going on. We're going to gather some more information and we'll get back to you. Or they will reach out to us saying, hey, we got this. We're not sure if it's an issue or not. Have you seen something similar? So there's a lot of dialogue back and forth. So I think for technicians and instructors, it's really important messaging to understand that we're not hiding anything from each other. We work quite closely together, and I think it's a very good relationship across the board for the majority of manufacturers, along with the government. um, we're open about it. We want to make sure that we're making a good product. If there's a safety concern, we want to ensure that it's addressed. So doing that, again, please feel free if you feel that there's a need to report a defect or a complaint to Transport Canada, to NHTSA, by all means do so. Nobody's going to discourage you from doing that, but include your manufacturer as well so that everybody can work together quicker that way and get a quicker resolution. Yeah, you can jump ahead, Tammy. Replacing car seats after a crash. So Transport Canada recommends disposing of any car seats or booster seats in a vehicle during a crash. Even if the car seat or booster seat was not occupied or was not directly hit, it may have been damaged. So we know that NHTSA has a little bit different guidance on this with minor collisions. You're not going to find that with Transport Canada. Their position remains that if it's been in a crash, it should be replaced. This poor little car seat that you see here in the picture was when I was out for a walk the other night. Came across this one, and of course I had to pick it up because it was a Graco seat on the side of the road. I took it home, cut the straps, did all the things that we would do because otherwise this was just out on the curb. I don't know what happened to it. It wasn't expired. It visibly it looked like it was in decent shape. So why was it disposed? Maybe it had been in a crash. Obviously, not the way we would like to see them disposed. So I took it, cut the straps, and did all the things we nerdy technicians and instructors like to do to make sure that nobody's going to use that car seat again because we want to ensure that they're safe. You can jump ahead. So speaking of secondhand car seats and booster seats, in Canada, under the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act, caregivers cannot advertise, sell, or give away car seats or booster seats unless they meet current Transport Canada safety requirements. Let's stop there for a second and we'll talk this one through. This will kind of hit us again as we get into regulatory updates. So under the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act, a product available on market, a product being imported, a product being sold, or as it states here, given away even, or loaned to somebody, has to meet the current requirements in Canada. Now, this has happened from time to time in the past, not only with car seats, but with other products, where there's a regulatory update and we'll just randomly use today's date as the in-force date. So on February 28th, this new regulation comes into force. Let's assume that there were some labeling updates and other changes that had to be made. So on May 27th, I could still sell the old product. I could give it to my friend. We could do whatever we wanted with it. On May 28th, if we are following the letter of the law, we can't do anything with that old product anymore. We can't sell it. I can't give it away as a donation. We can't do anything other than get rid of it because it's no longer meeting the current regulations in Canada. And I know that is a very strict kind of requirement, and it's very different from how things have been done in the US in the past, where typically the US works off of a manufacturing date, which gives a little more leeway. Here it tends to be a sale date, which makes it far more challenging to manage some of the inventory and stuff. This is feedback we have certainly provided to Health Canada and Transport Canada over the years to say that, look, the manufacturing date would certainly work a lot better for everybody because it gives us time to make sure we've gotten through that inventory. Nobody wants to see things go to landfill as opposed to being used, but that is the requirement as it sits today. So, as a manufacturer of children's products, in 2018, as an example, when our new playpen regulation came into effect, there were a number of playpens we just simply, sadly, had to throw out because we couldn't do anything with them. Some of them had been at stores with inventory levels that hadn't been accounted for. So when they came back to us, I can't even give them to our staff in our office. We actually had to just dispose of them, which was unfortunate, but we have to follow what the law states. So we're hoping that maybe some of that gets updated in the new regulations. Caregiver, oh, sorry, can you go back one sec, Tammy? Apologies. Thank you so much. Caregivers may need to check with the car seat or booster seat manufacturers to see if their car seat or booster seat meets the technical requirements. And then with Health Canada jumping in here as well, recommendations on secondhand car seats and booster seats can be found at the link below. And you're going to see a lot of the same information of, we don't recommend using a car seat unless you know the history of it. Do you know where you got it from? Can you account for it? Has it been in a crash? All these things, as we know, are very important whether you cross the border or not. That's still kind of what we're looking for. Now we can jump ahead. Thank you, my friend. So Module 8, we'll get into some rear-facing car seat stuff, and this is where the real fun begins in testing. So for those of you who are not overly familiar with Canadian testing requirements, there is one major one that's been a bit of a headache for manufacturers up here for years and years, and that's called the rebound requirement. So because there is a rebound requirement in Canada, there is often a difference in the use guidelines for the US and Canada. Always make sure you're checking the car seat instruction manual for the correct positioning of the carry handle, as an example. So we can skip ahead to the next slide. Thank you. And we wanted to explain a little bit about what rebound looks like. So on this, you're looking at an actual compliance test. That big long gray piece is the bench. If you follow the yellow arrow down to the bottom, there's a couple of little red and white targets. And that is where the rebound mark is on the bench. And there's obviously a calculation and some specifications of how we get there, but that's where the rebound target is. And the rebound test itself is actually fairly simple. So if you look at the green arrow on the right of the screen, there is a target just protruding there behind the seat on the ATD's head. The target on the ATD's head cannot pass the target on the bench. And it's really as simple as that. You could be a millimeter short, and if you're comfortable with that, you could go ahead and pass the test. You could be 5 millimeters over, that's a failure. We want to have as much margin as we can because part of the challenge with rebound testing is that it's not always as repeatable as some of the other tests. There's some different factors that can go into it with how the ATD moves, how they're positioned in the seat, how the seat moves even. So when we're talking about rebound, this can add quite a bit of complexity or different things. When we look at some Canadian seats, you'll see specific restrictions or modes of use that can only be used in certain recline positions or certain um, modes of use. You'll also see the addition sometimes of anti-rebound bars. Our Forever car seat in Canada has a different size and shape of cup holder as opposed to the Forever in the US, and that's to mitigate rebound. So a lot of times what we see is there's an increased cost to product in Canada because this requirement does not exist in the US and has not existed in the US. The thought behind this particular requirement was that it was going to prevent the children from kind of smacking the back vehicle seat. What we have found through a lot of testing and research is that number one, that doesn't typically happen. And number two, by the time you get to the rebound portion of the crash, all the energy's been expended anyway. There's been a lot of information provided to Transport Canada on this, so we're hoping maybe this is something that might go away in the future. But currently it exists. It's not going away anytime soon, at least until the new regulation update. So if you ever wonder why there are, more anti-rebound bars in Canada, why there's different seats with different features compared to the US, this is a big part of it. We can jump ahead, Tammy. Rear-facing weight limits. So in Canada, the RSSR states that a restraint designed for children weighing less than 22 pounds or 10 kilograms must be rear-facing. Specific regulations may vary slightly by province or territory, as we discussed a little bit earlier, and car seat manufacturers' guidelines should also be followed. So there's nothing to stop you from stating a higher weight, but you certainly can't state a lower one as far as the regulations are concerned. Okay, jump ahead again. So forward facing, so the minimum forward facing weight limit in Canada, most convertible and all-in-one car seats have a minimum weight limit for forward facing use of 22 pounds or 10 kilograms. What you'll find in Transport Canada's regulations also is that there's a minimum 1 year requirement for the most part. And they also have this funny little part about the child being able to walk unassisted. You'll find that if you read through a lot of the manuals or labels. Um, it's not greatly defined in the regulation as to what that means, but we've kind of assumed it means they need to be able to take at least a few steps on their own and not just topple over as soon as you let go of them. So there are some nuances as far as that goes. Can jump again, Tammy. Thank you very much. So in Canada, harnesses and vests are only available to children with specific transportation needs. Consult the child's healthcare team for more information. So currently as it sits, harnesses and vests are not addressed within the Canadian CMVSS regulations or the RSSR. I know a number of companies are working on this to try to help it, but you can import a harness or a vest currently under a special needs situation. And what that requirement would be is that the child's healthcare provider would essentially have to write a prescription for the need for them to be able to do so. You would have to carry that with them because there is no national safety mark issued for this category because it doesn't currently exist in Canada. So it's a special circumstance only, and it's imported on an as-needed basis, essentially. And jump ahead. Great. So booster seat labels, this is another one that's kind of a little bit of a funky requirement, and that is in Canada, the required information in the RSSR, minimum weight, installation diagram, weight, and height range, must be visible at all times, even while the booster seat is occupied by the child. Now, we were talking about trying to squeeze all these labels on in both official languages earlier with a bit of a challenge. Try doing it with the kid in the seat and the labels still being visible. So as we get into more and more of smaller boosters or heightless boosters and things like that, it becomes very, very challenging to meet this particular requirement. But it's very clearly stated within the regulation that we have to ensure that even if the child is sitting in the seat, you can still read the booster seat labels. And that's very important. You'll notice that little nuance on all the booster seats in Canada. Jump ahead again, my friend. Um, so school buses in Canada, federal regulations do not require seatbelts on any school bus. Each province or territory manages their own provincial territorial regulations. As of September 1, 2020, new school buses must meet technical requirements for how to install lap and shoulder belts on school buses if they are installed. These technical requirements, which do not allow the installation of lap belts, make sure that the seat belts are installed correctly and do not compromise the compartmentalization design. So essentially, they're starting to require some use of lap shoulder belts, which is great news because we want to ensure that we have them for some of the kids who need seats, especially on buses. Jump ahead again, Tammy, please. As of April 1, 2007, going back a little bit, federal standards require all school buses to have lower anchors and tether anchors with quantity based on the number of designated passenger seating positions. So designated seating positions up to 24, they were required to have 2 lower anchor tether locations. 25 to 65 seating positions, you had to have a minimum of 4, and then 66 plus, you had to have a minimum of 8. So we could transport more of those little kids in there who still required some seats at that point. And jump ahead again, my friend. Transport Canada recommends that children on a school bus who weigh less than 40 pounds or 18 kilograms or are younger than approximately 4.5 years old be correctly secured in a car seat that is appropriate for the child's weight and height. That obviously makes it difficult when we do not have a wide range of available seatbelts on a lot of buses or lower anchor positions, but more and more bus manufacturers are starting to do so. You're starting to see some talk, certainly, of more provincial or territorial requirements around this. So it's good to see in that regard. I think we'll see more and more as we go over time, but we're starting to get there. So we're starting to see this more and more. It's not just in the US, this is filtering north of the border as well. We want to ensure that these passengers also have some access to these to use the car seat still. And there we go.
Great,
Tammy,
thank
thank you.
you. All right. Well, as a reminder, if you have questions, the Q&A box is open. Please feel free to drop a question in there. And James, we do have one question back to Module 6, and this comes
Mhm.
from Danielle. And she asked if tether markings are required on the covers, if the covers are removable on the tether anchor, is there still a symbol near the anchor?
No. So if the so I think if I'm hearing the question right, Danielle, if the had to put a cover over the tether anchor itself in the vehicle and you remove the cover and somebody lost the cover because that's what's going to happen. Did they have to have another connect or another symbol there? No, they do not. They just have to have the one so that you can find it initially. I think the thought process behind that is if you've lost it, well, it's exposed, so you should be able to see it now.
Great. So I don't see any other questions at this point. Again, I'm going to go through a few closing announcements, and if something comes to mind, please enter them in there. So we do have a CEU webinar, meaning the National Child Passenger Safety Board. We'll be offering one in June, as shown here, and it's Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 213 updates. And I believe James is also participating in that one. Is that correct? He's
Yes, I
practicing how
am.
to say no in French and English. Where did we land is the subtitle. And then we have our next educator forum, which actually ironically is me. We'll be presenting on what's new with car seat basics. So if you're a car seat basics user or are thinking about it, we encourage you to to sign up and attend the educator forum in July. And if you have suggestions for topics or speakers for future forums, please reach out. You can always email secretariat@cpsboard.org. We would love to put your ideas into action. As a reminder, the National Child Passenger Safety Board will be opening up the 2026, or I'm sorry, they are already open, excuse me, the 2026 National Child Passenger Child nominations are open. So please nominate a technician, an instructor, or a team that inspires you to go above and beyond in your community. And nominations are due by August 31st of 2025. And you can see the super easy website to get to there, cpsboard.org/awards, and you can nominate somebody today. All right, we did have one more question come in, and that's what made me kind of slip on my words there. I was trying to read that and talk about the awards at the same time, so I do apologize. Jean is asking, can we now check Canadian-made seats at a U.S. event? Because I think either attending this webinar or overall, I'm not quite certain, but it just says, Jean, can you provide me a little bit more clarifying information perhaps?
I think
And
we would
Jane's,
say generally, Tammy, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but generally, if you are a certified technician and you're following the information in the manuals, you're checking a car seat no matter where you are typically, is what my response to that would be.
yeah, I think the only thing would be if you're in the US and it's a seat that meets Canadian motor vehicle safety standards and is not approved for use, is not labeled for use, uh, that it meets applicable federal motor vehicle safety standards, that would be a documentation point that the seat is not, that education was provided to the family.
Yes.
That the seat does not meet applicable federal motor vehicle safety standards and therefore technically should not be used in the United States.
And vice versa.
Yes. For our Canadians, we do have some Canadians who are listening as well today. So kind of on the flip side. Jane, I hope that answered your question. If not, please feel free to reach out either in the Q&A box or you can send it to secretariat@cpsboard.org and we can get you a better answer if that didn't answer your question. All right. So once again, I would like to thank James for sharing his Canadian knowledge with us today. We appreciate it. I learned some new today as well. Took some notes, put them on sticky notes to add to my instructor guide because I don't like to write in my instructor guide. Probably doesn't surprise you. And let you know that this Educators Forum will be posted again to the Child Passenger Safety Learning Portal at carseateducation.org. So if you want to share it with somebody, we'll have it posted within 1 to 2 business days. So thank you to Kendra for working on that. And then as a reminder, this Educators Forum did meet CEU requirements. So you'll be receiving an email tomorrow afternoon with that information so that you can earn your CEU for joining us today. And I hope each of you have a safe day and thank you for all that you do to help keep child passengers and their families safe. Kendra, would you please stop the recording?